roof, meditation cells, and courtyards can today be seen at the heritage sites in Afghanistan. There was a time when pilgrims, instead of coming straight into India, halted at the monastic centers of Afghanistan like Kunduz, Balkh, Bamiyan for special studies in Buddhism. This map shows the strategic position of Afghanistan on the Asian circuit and global network of trade routes. We see that a multitude of routes converged on and diverged from Afghan cities through several mountain passes and river valleys of the Hindu Kush, the Pamirs, and the Himalayan ranges. This map shows the Afghan ring road that is said to have taken its origin during Mauryan times of 3rd century BC. This ring road provided India the crucial connection with the whole of Asia, China, southern Russia, and through the Mediterranean and Black Sea with Europe. Being at the crossroad of the great Asian circuit, Afghanistan possessed the key to a flourishing Indian trade and the channels through which Indian thought spread out to Central Asia and China. This map shows 6 principal Afghan routes: the northwards through Balkh and Termez into Central Asia, northwestwards into Margiana along the Trans-Caspian route into West Asia, the western route through Herat into Meshad and onwards to the shore of Eastern Mediterranean, southern route through Ghazni and Kandahar and Quetta into Western India through the Gomal and the Bolan passes, eastwards along the Kabul-Jalalabad route via the Khyber Pass up to the Bay of Bengal, northeastwards through Badakhshan and Wakhan corridor into Xinjiang and China. Important monastic centers lay along all these routes. It was along these routes that both trade and Buddhism traveled. The Antiquity, we come to the Antiquity of Buddhism in Afghanistan during the time of Buddha in the 6th century BC and during the Mauryan rule of the 3rd century BC. The Antiquity of Buddhism in Afghanistan is dated to the time of Buddha himself, as Bactrian traders Trapassu and Bhalika, who were traveling on the above mentioned routes from Balkh to Bengal, are said to have met the Buddha at Sarnath and built the first stupas for him at Balkh. These are the Ashokan inscriptions in Afghanistan. The antiquity of Buddhism in Afghanistan can also be proved by these inscriptions of the Mauryan Emperor Ashoka of 3rd century BC, when the religion of the Buddha is said to have become international and physically accessible to a wide population. This was the time when the tenets of the Dhamma was being directed to the people of Gandhara, of which Afghanistan was a part. History tells us that Mauryan Empire controlled areas south of the Hindu Kush up to about 185 BC, including Parapo Misadi area southeast of Hindu Kush, Arakashia Kandahar, Jedrosia Baluchistan. As a result, we find Ashokan inscriptions in both Aramaic and Greek at 4 different sites in Afghanistan, which were inhabited by a large Greek-speaking population. A bilingual inscription from Shehrikuna near Kandahar and a slab from Kandahar having a Greek version of Rock Edict 12. According to historians, the location of this edict in Arakosia or Kandahar furnishes the epigraphic evidence confirming the extent of India's northwestern frontiers up to the borders of Persia. The Edict of Ashoka as Ashoka's religious propagandism from the 10th year after his coronation, after 260 BC. It informs that after 262 BC, Ashoka's interest in Buddhism became tivra, intense, and expressed itself in his practice of the dharma of non-violence. There are 3 Aramaic inscriptions of Ashoka found in the Lamghan province, which includes a broken stone slab from Puli Duranta and 2 highway inscriptions of 254 BC with prohibition on hunting and fishing. After the brief introduction about the location and importance of Afghanistan with regard to Buddhism and its spread into Central Asia and China, we look at some important heritage sites, beginning with the eastern provinces. We learned that Jalalabad, the capital of Nagarhara province, was one of the busiest cities of the Grand Trunk Route and a rich agricultural region due to a wide network of natural waterways from the streams of the Kabul and the Kunar rivers. For this reason, the Mauryan Emperor Ashoka found the eastern Afghan region of Nagarhara a strategic place for his edicts. One was found midway between the villages of Shalatak and Karga, and a second Ashokan inscription in Aramaic was discovered in 1973. Nagarhara was famous throughout the Buddhist world for the parietal bone of the Buddha in Hadda and his tooth in Nagarhara. The Buddha's robe and staff were also sacred remains in Hadda. During excavations, several Buddhist establishments, namely Tepi Kalan, Tepi Kapilha, Tepi Shotor, dating from the 2nd to the 7th century, have been found in the Jalalabad Valley, stretching from the Basawal to the gorge at Duranta. The 3-kilometer long complex consists of 100 groups of caves. Among the most precious relics from these caves is a relic casket of gold inlaid with precious rubies and carved with the figures of the Buddha and Bodhisattvas. It was recovered from the stupa in Bimaran and dated 1st century AD. It was called the Bimaran casket. We can see the Bimaran casket on the left. So we come to the monasteries in and around Kabul. Several monastic establishments have been dug out by collaborative teams of Afghan and foreign archaeologists within a radius of 40 kilometers around Kabul. The wealth of Buddhist antiquities recovered from Kabul and its surroundings and displayed in the museums around the world give ample evidence of the flourishing state of Buddhism in the region during the early centuries of our era. Ruins of several monastic establishments along caravan routes in and around Kabul were brought to light in the 19th and 20th century. Buddhist cities lying within a radius of 40 to 50 kilometers of Kabul include the monastic sites of Sarai Puja, Shotarat, Gol Darra, Gol Hamid, Kafiriyat Tepi at Mesainak, Tepi Maranjan, Tepi Naranj, Shevaki Stupa, and monastery near Yakdhara, Tope Darra near Istali, Stupa at Tapa Sikandar, the Kohi Devan Valley, going to Kapisa is also littered with Buddhist remains. Tepi Naranj and Tepi Maranjan are the two sites inside Kabul. Itinerant monks had occupied the slopes of Kabul hills in the vicinity of the present citadel of Bala Hissar that stands south of the city. Excavations here have unearthed the monastic sites of Tepi Naranj, meaning the Orange Hill, to the south, and Tepi Maranjan to the east on the hills. Among the many sculptures unearthed from the monastery of Tepi Maranjan on Maranjan Hill, excavated by French archaeologists Hakin and Karl, is a life-size image of the sitting Buddha, a sitting Bodhisattva dated 2nd century CE. We can see that the peculiar headdress is like a wreath of flowers that once held a large precious stone hanging on the forehead. The neck is adorned by a double layer of necklace, one clasping the neck while the second hanging on the chest. The posture is that of meditation, and traces of polychrome is visible on the surface. We come to the site of Mesainak, 40 kilometers from Kabul. And these two sites are the Gol Hamid and Kafiriyat Tepa. The Afghanistan Institute of Archaeology has identified the remains of a Buddhist city covering over 1,000 hectares around the Baba Wali Mountains that functioned from the Kushana to the late Shahi period. The huge number of artifacts excavated from the site and displayed in the special hall of the National Museum of Kabul sheds light on the Buddhist art of the Kabul region. Archaeologists have discovered two large monastic centers, namely the Gol Hamid and Kafiriyat Tepe. Unfortunately, the Chinese mining company MCC has a contract to extract the world's largest copper reserves in the large open cast mines, which pose a great danger to the historical and religious treasures buried in these hills. Now we come to the monasteries of Kapisa. Lying 60 kilometers north of Kabul in Begram district and situated at the confluence of the Gorband and Panjshir rivers, the renowned monastic sites of Kapisa was a flourishing trade center. Due to great wealth and patronage of merchants and rulers, a plethora of monasteries were erected on the hills of Begram. Huyen Sang informs that there were nearly 100 monasteries with 6,000 priests, and renowned scholars of Buddhism like Prajnakara lived there. The list of monasteries included Shotara, Petwa, Khamizargar, Sarai Puja, Karacha, all dated between the 2nd and the 4th century CE. It was from these hill monasteries that several images of the Buddha and schist were recovered, and which form one of the rare statuary collections of the National Museum at Kabul. The monasteries of Kapisa are known to have adopted a distinct style and representation of some of the favorite themes taken from the life of the Buddha and Jatak stories. One of the themes was the depiction of the Dipankar Buddha and the idea of a Buddhist paradise created in relief on schist. The former relief depicts Bodhisattvas meeting with Dipankar Buddha. The Bodhisattva spread his deerskin robe and unloosened his hair to protect the Buddha from mud, and in consequence received a predictive assurance that he would become a Buddha. These are now displayed at Musée Goumet in Paris. Another slide we see of the Buddhist paradise. Here we see Maitreya the Bodhisattva, who is predicted to succeed Shakyamuni as the future human Buddha. He is born in Tushita heaven, where in an inner palace he reveals the law to the heavenly beings. We come to the famous Buddhist site of Bamiyan. We learn that itinerant monks from India are believed to have settled in Bamiyan during the time of the Mauryan Emperor Ashoka's Dhamma missions to the Greek kingdoms. It continued to be a major center of Buddhism during the subsequent Indo-Greek and Kushan periods. Sitting 2,500 meters above the sea level, the long east-west Bamiyan Valley is fed by two rivers, the Kakrak to the east and Fuladi to the west, both having their origin in the Kohi Baba range. Two immense rock statues of the Buddha, believed to represent Lokottara, the Lord of the world, which once dominated the Buddhist complex. Thousands of cave shrines, assembly halls, and residences for monks were carved out of cliffs between the two giant Buddhas and were decorated with paintings. The Archaeological Survey of India, involved in the restoration work at Bamiyan from 1969 to 1976, they have dated the colossi between the 3rd and 4th centuries. Today, these are represented by dark, empty niches, standing like tall shadows in the face of the beautiful Bamiyan mountains. We can see some of the slides on Bamiyan. This is the over 38 meters high cave of small Buddha at Bamiyan. And the previous one was the cave of the big Buddha at Bamiyan, about 55 meters high. These are the cluster of caves. These are vertical cliffs. Even the vertical cliffs have been carved. What remains at the big Buddha cave is the gigantic right foot of the Colossi. Now only this remains. This slide is about, when I visited, it was about 6 years ago. This is what remains at the site. Now we come to the manuscripts found at Bamiyan, both in Brahmi and Kharoshthi. In the monastic establishments at Bamiyan were found manuscripts on birch bark, palm leaf, and vellum written in Brahmi and Kharoshthi. Some Buddhist manuscripts with the Shuen collection have been preserved in the library of the National Museum at Kabul, dated from about the 1st century AD. These are believed to be the oldest Buddhist manuscripts yet discovered. These are the caves of the neighboring Kakrak Valley, a second center of Buddhist art in Afghanistan, and also the abode of a Buddha Colossi known as the Kakrak Buddha, stood in the ravines of the Kakrak River, east of the Bamiyan Cliff. The caves are located about 6 kilometers southeast of the city. The famous standing Buddha of Kakrak is said to have been over 6 meters high. The statue was destroyed by the Taliban along with 2 giant Buddhas of Bamiyan in 2001. These are some more slides from the Kakrak Valley. We can see the cave of the big Buddha, 6 meters tall. These are the tall shrines of the Kakrak Valley. The colossal Buddha of Bamiyan, which was blown up by the Taliban, 55 meters high, big Buddha of Bamiyan. So here is the small Buddha of Bamiyan, 38 meters high. This is the Kakrak Valley, Buddha of the Kakrak Valley, 6 meters high image of Kakrak Buddha.
Ms. Dwivedi, I'll have to request you to move towards the conclusion of your talk for another perhaps if possible in 2-3 minutes.
Okay, with Bamiyan I'm ending. These are the 3 colossi, Buddha colossi of Bamiyan Kakrak. Just one more center at Bamiyan is the Foladi Valley, caves of the Foladi Valley, where now I think some school has opened. These are some of the caves with painted ceilings of the Foladi caves. Embellished ceilings of the Foladi caves. So with this I end Bamiyan. I have more Kunduz and Samangan and all, but since there's shortage of time, I'm ending here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Dwivedi, for yet another very graphic and rich talk, about Buddhist sites and artifacts, and
Yes,
also
thank
taking
you.
us through the bylanes and lanes of connected with the development of Buddhism in Afghanistan. I would now request the second speaker, Dr. Abhiram Sharma, to come on the stage, or perhaps he's already on the stage. We are on the. It's a very strange time in a hybrid mode. You're not able to see, but I'm sure that he's there. So I would like to invite him um, uh, for sharing stock. Another same things that we'll have around 20 to 22 minutes, and then we'll go in that. Uh, Dr. Aviram Sharma, as Gunjan gave a slightly detailed, CV at the beginning, but he teaches at Nalanda University, and he's a while with Miss Devedi, we saw a kind of a more of a traveler kind of an input, with Aviram Sharma. I think we'll have a more of a core academic, in terms of prime constituency, taking us through a topic which is very interesting, which is called worldling of Bodh Gaya. So over to you, Dr. Sharma. Thank you, Dr. Sharma. Also for doing it within a very finite time, basically. Now, and thank you for giving us very interesting, picture into the contemporariness of Bodh Gaya, and therefore, by extension, the Buddhist world that is developing there, and also for pointing out the dynamics between the space and worldview, highlighting the role of the three stakeholders or actors, as you would like to call them. Sometimes actors become stakeholders in the new, city formulation debates, which is the government, the monasteries, and the local inhabitants, and also for alerting us to this convergence between, two different models of urbanism and rurality, and how they could converge and supplement each other. I would now like to throw the floor open for questions. Please identify yourselves first and then ask questions. So over to questions. Dr. Sharma, would you like to take that question? I would request the audience, members of the audience, to, if possible, to please also indicate who they want, the questions to be answered from. I'm assuming that this one is directed to Dr. Sharma. So, Dr. Sharma, would you like to respond to that?
Economy we want. So is it the normal tourist based industry, like, and that is why, like, within Bodh Gaya often there are conflicting views between like hotel industry, which is more interested in international tourists in terms of revenue, and like monasteries which are also catering to the pilgrims. So this debate has been there, and that is why, like, exploring these debates are very important. From the Mahant point of view, like, Mahant used to be like one of the major stakeholder till 1980s. After that, like, the influence of Mahant and Mahant and the Mutt as an institution has declined. But at the same time, even in today's time, they play a crucial role in terms of shaping the kind of urbanization which is unfolding. And we are furthering this research, like we are doing more research along these lines, and we are trying to understand how slums in Bodh Gaya has emerged. So, like, during the initial survey, like, we found out that, like, many of those slums have come up in those lands, like, which were originally with the Mahant. So when this transition has happened, like, how new forms of urbanization has happened, and the conflict between the landholding and those who are inhabiting these spaces. So obviously I agree with most of your points, like, and these are important considerations. Like, the whole point is to see it from, like, more diverse point and see the connection. So when we are talking about Bodh Gaya, we do not talk about only one actor, but we try to create a dialogue between different actors, whether it is like Hindu tourists who are coming to visit Bodh Gaya for Hindu pilgrimage and then visiting Bodh Gaya for some other purpose, and similarly, like, Buddhist tourists, like, who are coming to Bodh Gaya, similarly, like, how the linkages can be developed. And that is why, like, when we are talking about Buddha Chitra, like, it is important to define, like, what that Chitra means. What does the idea of reason means in this particular context, and connecting the dot between these different kind of sacred and religious and urban spaces.
My question is to Dr. Sarma. Actually, in Buddhist philosophy, the poor people and excluded community, they were kept at the center. So in the process of this urbanization or tourism development, a lot of people are coming from outside, right? So it has created a lot of opportunities. But in this process, how these excluded communities, for example, yesterday you have seen the Musar communities, they are Deskal society is trying to bring them to the mainstream. So in this process, a lot of revenue is being generated. So in this process of urbanization, how these communities can be included? For instance, there are a lot of shops nearby the temples. I don't know how many shop owners are from this excluded community. Is there any effort to include these communities in this process?
So thanks once again for the wonderful question. Yes, there are different kind of communities and there are different ways in which government is engaging with them. And for instance, there is a strong trade association of vendors who are working in this region. So they also have a strong voice in terms of shaping the urban debate. But at the same time, there are many non-governmental organizations and civil society organizations also working in the region, and they are talking about the rights and livelihood of many of those communities. But then this is also linked with the broader political economy question. The better the opportunity this place brings, the more number of people who will come to this place. So that debate is also going to stay, but at the same time, from the Buddhist point of view, or from when we see Bodh Gaya as a unique space, then the bigger question is how those who believe on the idea of Buddhism and those who believe on the ideals of Buddhism engage with those questions to mainstream those questions which are completely ignored. They may be ignored in other contexts, and they are also getting ignored in this context. That is the bigger question. So how their concerns can be mainstreamed, and how we can think about ways in which we can reimagine this urban space with those ideals in mind.
Any other questions, please? We have some time since we began this session a little late, so we have some time for a little more questions. And do we have any more questions, please, from the audience? Okay, in that case, while we're expecting some questions, I'm just, one question that I would like to ask to both the speakers, today. To begin with, Dr. Sharma, I think you talked about this dynamics between urbanization and about, the different stakeholders or the different actors on the scene. I wanted to know if within that model, I'm talking about more in terms of cultural spaces within this model of urbanization, or within this debate on urbanization, how does the proposed relocation of the market around the temple complex, basically, is going to affect the cultural space? And when I say cultural space, I also talk about the dynamics of Gaya versus Bodh Gaya. The overlap between them, and also sometimes, people bring about, sometimes the conflicts and overlaps between them. So how do you like to respond to that?
It's again a wonderful question, but at the same time quite complex question, and I don't have an easy answer to this. But the only thing is government is also trying to engage with some of these questions. So they are also thinking it from the lens of the regional planning. So how Gaya and Bodh Gaya can be planned together. And so we also need to think along those broader lines, how not only focusing on Bodh Gaya, in the region, how we can think about reimagining these urban spaces together rather than as separate urban spaces or separate cultural spaces. Similarly, I believe Bodh Gaya dialogue and similar dialogues, I hope will bring the platform and the opportunity to debate and think about these questions from the wider possible ways, which has been mostly, in my experience so far, not as forthcoming as one wants. And this is one of, again, the bigger problems of small towns. When you talk about like Delhi or Bangalore or Kolkata, you will see a lot of civil society movement and a lot of non-governmental movements in those spaces. But the moment you go beyond these big urban centers, you see dearth of available literature, dearth of like human resources, dearth of institutions which are working and active in the regions. So in that context, I think like Bodh Gaya Dialogue is a wonderful initiative. There are institutions which are active in the region, and the idea is to promote more dialogue along those institutions to collectively think on these complex questions, which do not have any simple answer.
Do we have some more questions from the audience?
Yes, Sinha Sahab. Just one question.
Yes, yes.
And I would like to ask it from Dr. Sharma. Dr. Sharma, I'm Arjit Walia. So I am associated with K-12 education market, right? So my question to you is that you have mentioned that as per the plan, government is moving to create Bodh Gaya instead of pilgrim site. They are trying to project it as a tourist destination, right? So now they have, when you say tourist destination, then there are different sections of society, of different type of travelers that need to be catered, right? And education sector, when I say education sector, I mean school students effectively, are the one who, if can be associated with Bodh Gaya, then it can create a mass movement in future, right? So what is your opinion, and what do you think the ways by which school students effectively can be brought to Bodh Gaya? Because if you ask them to come here only for religious purpose, effectively, because of the nature, because of their age, unfortunately, it is tough for us to keep them aligned here. So what do you think are the ways by which they can be brought here and they can be kept engaged, they can be shown the places which keep them interested effectively? So that is my question to you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks once again for the question. It's a very pertinent question, but at the same time, like, it's a very broad question. So as far as I have understand this region, Bodh Gaya Dialogue, during this event also, like, we plan to bring teachers from the region so that like they can also be part of this exercise and collectively think about imagining like how we are imagining. Because in any case, like if you will talk to archaeologists and religious studies scholars, so they have written enormously and developed wonderful theories and literature on this. But at the same time, there is a disconnect between the people and the academic community. So that is a big concern, and how we are going to address that question. Like one way to look into this question is through these linkages. So one is obviously through this civil society organization. Apart from that, like in Bihar, historical sites. So that is already in progress. But at the same time, in terms of like operationalizing it, how we can improve the quality of those visits. And in that broader context, I personally think that like many times when we talk about history, then we talk about nation, we talk about the global history, but very rarely we talk about the regional history. So like the more we engage with the regional history, the more we will engage with the local history, the better the connection between like the people and the past would be. Otherwise, like we talk about heritage, but it still remain confined among like some of those educated societies, educated communities, and it doesn't go beyond the boundary of like those who are well educated. So making those connections and reaching to the masses through different label by engaging the local and the regional history, I think is one of the way forward. Thank you.
Do we have some more questions, please? Perhaps one or two. While we're thinking of, I was thinking that, to direct one question to Ms. Trivedi. Or do we have somebody from the audience? Then we can go ahead with the question from the audience.
Yeah,
Yes.
hello. Thank you. I'm Dr. Ritesh from Jivika, and we are working very deeply with the women workforce here, especially in the context of Bihar. And in total, we are having more than 43,000 self-help groups, which are mostly related with the women workforce. So my question is to you that can we see the role of the women who are basically the carrier of promoting the culture to the next generations, and they are very much useful for that. So can we envisage certain interface of the collectives of the women and the women as a carrier of this cultural heritage of the Buddhism, especially in context of Gaya and Bodh Gaya? This is my question to you. Ms. Can we just think of it, designing something in framework of that so that we can use the women workforce and the institution as such so that we can just promote this cultural heritage in more better way?
So again, like as per my knowledge of Jivika, Jivika is widely active in this region, and they have been engaging a lot of women in different kind of socioeconomic activities. But in this particular context, the bigger question is like, how do they relate with the question of history? How do they imagine past? And unfortunately, in my understanding and in my engagement with the local community here, like still people are not able to link with the broader history. For many, like the Buddhist history is not like part of the collective past. So it's there, but at the same time, like it's not part of the common understanding. So I will just give you one simple story. Like I teach at Nalanda, and a few years back, like we were riding on a bike in the nearby region. So we went a bit away from the town, and like we were on the foothills of like the Rajgir Hills. So there, like we tried to capture some photographs, because in the backdrop, like there was a wonderful mountain, and in the backdrop there was moon appearing. It was kind of like evening. Then people started chasing us, assuming that like we are from police department, and they wanted to capture us because they assumed that like we are taking photographs because they were illegally mining stones there. And then when we explained that we are just taking the snap of this beautiful mountain, they were unable to understand that why they will be taking picture of this, why they are here. Their first question is why you are here, why you are at this particular place. And one of the women said, Buddha is in Rajgir. So why you are here? So for them, Rajgir is the place for Buddha, not the reason. So that's the bigger question. So how you engage with the past, how you engage with, how you collectively imagine, and until that consciousness, that collective imagination is there, it would be very challenging to bring them as one of the important actor. But definitely, like we should work with that particular group. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, that would be a good note. We are running out of time, and that would be a very good note, about, the multiple worlds. That was a fascinating example about the multiple worlds that inhabit the world of spiritualism, the world of history writing, the world of development discourses, and the world of negotiating with different stakeholders. On that note, we would like to, conclude this session. So thank you very much, Dr. Sharma and Ms. Trivedi, for this very enlightening sessions. And thank you very much to the members of the audience for this, for being with us for this afternoon session, and also for your very good questions. Thank you very much.
Have a film screening in this session, and the film is White Robes, Saffron Dreams, and it's a film by Tina Amrit Gill. Before I invite the director, the beautiful mind that has created the film, let me place before you a brief bio of the director. Tina Gill is a filmmaker and development consultant with background in gender, discrimination studies, and journalism. Her first independent film, Orange Alert, on pesticide poisoning and the organic farmers movement in Thailand, where she lived for 11 years, received the jurors a special prize at Earth Vision, the 5th Global Environmental Film Festival in Tokyo. Her film, White Robes, Saffron Dreams on Gender, Intersectionality and Theravada Buddhism in Thailand, premiered at the London Feminist Film Festival and won the first prize documentary section at the Central Illinois Film Festival, USA. She recently completed Fatehpur Sikri, a poetry film based on the work of renowned modern Indian poet Kunwar Narayan. She has directed, scripted, and edited over 20 commissioned and independent films for various organizations, including Oxfam GB, Helpage International, and Young Asia TV. She is presently directing a film on women in early and contemporary Buddhism in India's Himalayan region for IGNCA and 2 poetry films. Thank you. Now I would like to invite the director of this film, Amrita Gill, to please come on the dais and give the first hand and original narration on the film. Okay, ma'am, please.
Thank you so much. And before I begin, you know, a lot of the film is in Thai, so there are these English subtitles. So if you would like to come forward or kind of shift your chairs, especially the people in the back, because you won't be able to read the English subtitles, and then the Thai, जो थाई में भाषा होगी वो मतलब आपको बिल्कुल समझ में नहीं आएगी, I gather, unless you know Thai. So I was just thinking if you can somehow come forward ताकि वो जो subtitles दिखेंगे नीचे तो जो आएंगे नीचे छपके तो वो अगर आप देख पाएं तो that will just help the experience of understanding the film, yeah, or being with the film. Yeah, so just a brief, I just like to just briefly introduce the film and also just again briefly introduce the context of or the journey of Buddhism to Thailand and to Southeast Asia, just to help us relate to the film. So the film is basically a film on gender, intersectionality and discrimination in Theravada Buddhism in Thailand. The film you'll see will take you through the life of a young Thai monk and a young Thai nun to explore how Buddhism in Thailand has, you know, or the experience of women practitioners in Buddhism in Thailand. After the film, I'll share with you a little bit about the making of the film. But I'd just like to say to you briefly that basically Buddhism in Thailand went, or in Southeast Asia, went through Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka had already, during the time of Ashoka, adopted Buddhism. And Theravada Buddhism is what this form of Buddhism was. This is in the 3rd century BCE, around that period. And then it was much later, in the 1st century, that from Sri Lanka, Buddhism basically traveled to Southeast Asia, to Burma, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and to some extent to Vietnam. So while in India, of course, as we know, by around the 8th century, Buddhism was in decline. And by the 10th and certainly by the 11th centuries, it had almost totally vanished from India, from the land in which it rose. In Southeast Asia, I think it's important that Buddhism didn't necessarily continue to be in the way in which it was in India. It adapted and took on many different avatars. So depending on the historical, the social, and also the political contexts in which Buddhism entered Southeast Asia, these included the role of the monks in those countries, the role of the monarchy in Thailand, and gender relations. And according to those situations, Buddhism adapted itself to those environments. In Sri Lanka, for example, Buddhism was destroyed by the Cholas in the 11th century. But then it was revived about 70 years ago. But the Bhikkhuni Sangha, the women's Bhikshuni Sangha, was never revived again. So there was a choice which was made in Sri Lanka actually to not revive the Bhikshuni Sangha for various reasons which we won't go into. And it was only in 1996. So basically there were no more Bhikshunis in Theravada Buddhism known to be at that time. And nearly 1,000 years after the Bhikshuni Sangha died out, in 1996, this Sangha was revived again in Sri Lanka. So, so when I began actually working on this film in Thailand in the mid-90s, this whole area was actually quite contentious. And there was a lot of conflict around these issues, very little conversation. And it was in this arena that I started making this film, which we'll now see. Yeah.
Just another day in the life of a modern nation. A Buddhist nation. Just another day at work for women and men. And just another day at work for the monks. All seems tranquil and orderly in this world. On the middle path. But much is unseen. For many, the doors to the citadel are firmly closed. In Thailand, it is the traditional duty of sons to ordain and join the monkhood, so they can give their parents better karma. For at least a few months in his life, every Thai boy is ordained, even the king. But those from poorer families often stay on as monks for several years. In the shade of the Sangha, they find food and shelter and are provided with an education.
อาตมาภาพมีพี่น้องด้วยกัน5 คนอาชีพของพ่อแม่ของอาตมาภาพก็คือเป็นชาวสวนชาวไร่เนี่ยต่างที่ท่านระดับมัธยมปลายอาตมาภาพก็ได้มาเรียนต่อที่เชียงใหม่ แต่ว่าสำหรับพ่อใจนี่จะมีโอกาสจะมีทางเลือก2 ทางคือ1บวชเป็นพระเรียนต่อหรือว่า2นี่ก็คือเป็นคนบ้านเนี่ยเรียนต่อเพราะว่าอย่างที่อาตมาภาพเล่าให้โยมว่าฐานะของอาตมาภาพพ่อแม่ฐานะของพ่อแม่ก็ยากจนเนี่ยถ้าว่าอาตมาภาพเป็นฆราวาสหรือว่าเป็นคนบ้านนี่จะบ่มีโอกาสในการเรียนต่ออาตมาภาพก็ตัดสินใจบวชแล้วก็ได้เรียนต่อจนถึงปัจจุบันส่วนใหญ่แล้วที่ว่าเจ้าหมู่อาตมาภาพที่มาบวชส่วนใหญ่นี่จะตั้งใจเรียนจบปริญญาตรีแต่ถ้าว่าจบปริญญาตรีแล้วเนี่ยถ้าว่าเพิ่นค่อยลาสิกขากันหรือว่าเรียนต่อกันนี่ก็มันจะแบ่งเป็น2 กลุ่มแรกก็คือบวชเรียนต่อเลยเรียนต่อระดับปริญญาโทปริญญาต่อปริญญาเอกแต่แฮมกลุ่มนึงก็คือจบปริญญาตรีแล้วก็ลาสิกขาออกไปแล้วก็ไปเรียนต่อข้างนอก
Like many of his fellow monks, Khamphon came from an underprivileged family in northern Thailand, one of the poorest regions of the country.
แม่จะเป็นแม่จะเป็นเน้นแม่
อ๋อเป็นขอแม่ก็ต้องมาไปขอเป็นเน้น
อันนี้เบื่อบวชนะเบื่อบวชก็ให้ไปเลยนะฮารีเนาะโอ้อยู่กับลูกกับเมียนี่ทุกข์นะพี่น้องอย่างนี้นะพี่น้องอย่างนี้ทุกข์แต่มีสตางค์นะอันนี้สตางค์เดี๋ยวนี้ก็10 บาทก็บ่มีอ่ะนี่
มาถึงวันได้ใจสตังค์ก็ต้อง
ได้จ่ายนะจ่าย2 บาท 3 บาทแล้วนะมันนะจะได้จ่าย200 300บ่มีนะวันนึง200 300บ่มีนะ
แล้วถ้าสมมุติอีนอว่าถ้าเปิ่นไม่ได้บวชพระแม่จะให้เป็นทำให้หยังจังอยากให้เปิ่นเป็นอย่างนี้
ทั้งให้ทั้งสวน
อ๋ออยากเพิ่มมาทำให้ทั้งสวน
ชื่อมาทั้งให้ทั้งสวน
Over 600,000 young monks like Kampon study in temple schools and universities across the country. For boys from poor families, this is their only hope for passage to a better life. But while monk Kampon got these opportunities, his sister had to drop out of school and stay at home. For girls, the option to enter the Buddhist monkhood does not exist.
ตอนนี้ก็บอกอยู่กับแม่ทำงานทั่วๆไปเป็นการต่อผ้าส่วนตัวพ่องต่อผ้าไม่ได้เรียนต่อถึงป .6 ชั้นประถมศึกษาป .6 ที่อาตมาภาพเคยถามก็คือเพิ่นอยากเรียนต่อเหมือนกันแต่โอกาสสำหรับเป็นแม่ยิงนี่มันก็บ่ฮู้จะอาตมาภาพก็บ่ฮู้จะส่งเสริมในด้านไหนแต่อาตมาภาพพยายามจะส่งเสริมให้เรียนกศนอันนี้อาตมาภาพก็ส่งเสริมให้เรียนกศนถ้าว่าแม่ยิงนี่บ่สามารถที่บวชเป็นพระอย่างได้ตามในพระพุทธศาสนาเฮาแล้วก็ถ้าเป็นพ่อใจก็สามารถที่จะบวชแล้วก็ไปเรียนต่อเพราะว่าการศึกษาปัจจุบันของพระภิกษุสามเณรนี่ก็มีความเจริญที่ก้าวหน้าขึ้น
But it is recorded that the Buddha created an order of both female and male monastics. Bhikkhunis and bhikkhus. These women were ordained, practicing Buddhist nuns, on the same path to enlightenment as men. They received the same robes, took their vows, and gave up their worldly lives. The Buddha's own mother, Mahaprajapati Gautami, was a bhikkhuni. Other famous bhikkhunis like Amrapali and Srimala, the queen of Kosala, have passed into Buddhist legend. But today in Thailand and across Asia, it is unusual to see an ordained Buddhist nun. What does exist in Thailand is a small group of women in white, living on the fringes of the Thai religious world. They are called Mae Chi. There are between 10 to 20,000 Mechis in Thailand, most of whom live in temples. But they have little or no standing in society. In the temples, their main task is to perform domestic chores. They are permitted to take 8 precepts of vows, wear white robes and shave their heads. This is the only monastic option for Thai women. And even these nuns in white have never been accepted by the Buddhist Sangha. They have no legal status. The decision to forbid Thai women from wearing the saffron robes of ordination dates back to 1928, when Sara and Chongdi Bhasit, daughters of a radical Buddhist monk, chose to become bhikkhunis. A public outcry followed, and they were forcibly disrobed and imprisoned. The same year, a law was passed which forbade the ordination of women by Thai monks.
So many nuns, they were told to believe that taking care of the monk is practicing Dhamma. No? And to me, this is the whole misunderstanding and its abuse of the Buddhist institution to make women believe that by taking care of the monk, now you are, Buddhist or you're a good Buddhist. No? So I found that either living inside the monastery, they also live in the confined world. But they want to go outside, they don't get support. Many nuns, I think they were so familiar with the oppressive system that they think it's a karma, because it's also a teaching that told them to believe this is your karma. If you want to be enlightened or you want to really, enter whatever this kind of spiritual path, it will be your next lifetime when you become a man. So they believe, oh, this is my karma. Even recently, I met a nun who's very strong. She was abused by the monk, and she said, oh, next lifetime, if I can become a man, I be a monk, it will be different. I just have to take this another 30 years, 40 years,
Every morning, the monks as bhikkhus or beggars go out to collect alms as the Buddha himself had done. In Thailand, it is mostly women who give alms so that they can earn merit. According to Thai belief, this gives women the chance to be reborn as men in their next lives, so they can then ordain as monks. Meanwhile, in this life, Thai women have to work hard. Despite Thailand's image as a prosperous economy, what is little known is that nearly half of the population, or 30 million Thais, work in the informal sector. A large percent of these workers are women. Though schooling is free, very few can afford the add-on costs such as books and transport. So nearly 40% of all Thai children have to drop out of school by the age of 13. More than half of these dropouts are girls because they do not have the option of attending Buddhist schools and universities. In a small corner of the country, in Lamphun province, an older Mechi, Arun Peturai, realized that girls from poorer families need financial assistance to stay in school. So she decided to give them the opportunity to become mechis and pursue their education. She actively solicited funds from concerned individuals and institutions and set up a small institute for nuns which could accommodate around 30 girls.
ส่งแม่ชีที่สำนักอะค่ะไปเขาเรียกว่าเผยแพร่ศาสนานะคะที่จังหวัดอุบลนะคะที่วัดนะคะแล้วทีนี้ก็เลยไปเจอกันที่โน่นนะคะก็เลยเขาเลยชักชวนว่าอยากเรียนไหมอย่างเงี้ยคือถ้าไม่ได้เข้ามาบวชตรงจุดนี้นะคะป่านนี้ก็คงจะต้องออกไปข้างนอกถ้าจะไปทำงานหรือตกที่ไหนก็ไม่รู้อะค่ะจะเป็นยังไงบ้างก็ไม่รู้อะค่ะแต่เผอิญชื่อโชคดีหน่อยอะค่ะที่ได้มาเจอกับหลวงแม่รุนท่านนะคะและท่านได้สนับสนุนแล้วก็ส่งเสริมให้เราเรียนมาตลอดสอนให้เราตลอดมาจนถึงวันนี้ค่ะ
Like monk Kampon, Rochna comes from a farming family in Ubon Ratchathani province in the northeast of Thailand. Most people here are poor subsistence farmers, and there are few opportunities for work. Rochna's unemployed brother had already left the house to become a monk, while the rest of her family stayed at home and worked on the land.
มีพี่ผู้ชายนี้คือจะเป็นผู้ชาย5 คนค่ะแล้วผู้หญิงนี้จะเป็น3 คนแล้วรจนาเป็นคนสุดท้องไม่ได้เรียนนะคะส่วนมากแล้วเขาจะเรียนกันจบม.6 อะค่ะจบม.6 บางคนก็ม.3 ค่ะแล้วก็ต้องออกมาช่วยพ่อกับแม่ทำงานแม่กับพ่อทำงานอะไรบ้างทำไร่ทำนาเนี่ยค่ะ
In this situation, getting an education would have been a distant dream for Rochna. Her mother knew that allowing Rochna to become a nun was her only chance to study, even if this meant moving far away from home. The support system provided by the Buddhist temples had no place for Rochna.
เห็นว่าเอื่อยมันอยากไปแม่ก็เลยบ่มีความคัดของก็มีความพอใจนะมีความพอใจอยากให้ลูกไปก็บ่ฮู้ว่ามันสิดีสิชั่วตามใจลูกมากลูกอยากก็ปล่อยตามใจลูกทุกคนก็บ่เคยปล่อยเพราะว่าแม่มันขาดเงินแม่บ่มีเงินแม่บ่มีทุนบ่มีทรัพย์ให้ลูกนะก็ลูกสิบ่ได้เรียนนี่แม่ก็ภูมิใจนี่ลูกแม่ได้เรียนนี่ลูกแม่เอาไปนี่บ่ได้เสียเงิน
Funds were scarce at the institute, and life was simple. Twice Rochna and the other Maichis attended a non-formal government school. Occasionally, English was taught at the institute by foreign volunteers.
Let's try this. What is the chicken doing?
Chicken.
The chicken. The chicken is sitting down?
Not really.
He's standing, isn't he? The chicken is standing. The chicken is standing.
The chicken in the stand. In the stand chứ đúng không?
Religious education and practice was compulsory, but not as rigorous as that of fully ordained nuns or bhikkhunis. Mechis take only 8 vows, while bhikkhunis must take over 300. Rochna was among the most hardworking of the students and was determined to get ahead. But she could not find much time to study. She and the other Mechis had to build the life they had chosen.
ช่วงตอนเช้าเนี่ยคือแม่ชีอรุณท่านจะสอนธรรมะจะเรียนเป็นธรรมะกันนะคะค่ะหลังจากนั้นก็จะไปช่วยพี่คือที่เป็นแม่ชีคือพี่พิมพ์นะคะเขาจะทำสวนก็ไปช่วยกันนะคะค่ะทำทุกอย่างนะคะที่อยู่ที่นั่นค่ะก็ยากมากเพราะว่าวันอาทิตย์หนึ่งเนี่ยบางทีจะได้เรียนแค่วัน2 วันอย่างเงี้ยค่ะเพราะว่าเป็นของกศน.นะคะค่ะก็เลยไม่ค่อยเราไม่ได้เรียนทุกวันนะคะแล้วเวลาสอบมาเงี้ยก็ค่อนข้างจะยากอยู่ค่ะ
With little financial support or help from the outside, most of the buildings had to be constructed by Rochna and the other Mechis. Unlike the monks, they had no ready-made monastery. These grand temples and schools are built for the monks by lay people and subsidized by the state. The temples offer a modern education, some with excellent facilities on par with state schools. Importantly, the monks may leave the temple for a secular life whenever they choose.
ธรรมภาพตั้งใจว่าถ้าสามารถเรียนต่อได้จะเรียนต่ออยู่อย่างน้อยก็ถ้าจบปริญญาโทก็ยังดีจะตั้งใจไว้นะก็คือถ้าว่าเขาจะเรียนต่อได้มันก็ขึ้นอยู่หลายอย่างด้วยกันเพื่อมีความรู้นักขึ้นเป็นคนที่มีวิสัยทัศน์กว้างไกลขึ้นอันนี้ธรรมภาพแต่นั้นในเรื่องนี้คือว่าอยากจะเป็นคนที่แบบมีความรู้และก็สามารถเอาไปพัฒนาบ้านเกิดเพราะว่าธรรมภาพตั้งใจว่าจะต้องทำงานอีกหลายๆอย่างเพื่อชุมชนในหมู่บ้านอาตมาภาพก็ดีหรือว่าในพระพุทธศาสนาก็ดี
want you to now put your head together and create a vision of a society that we don't have this suffering of women. What does it look like? Is that you propose? We should have limited number of monks. Is that there are less and less number of monks, right?
Less monks, more nuns.
But don't you think that more women will really practice? No? Is that a vision we have?
One day, if a woman can be a monk and sit there on the altar and give a teaching, it will make a difference. The Buddha teaching from the woman now. If we have a lot of influence, to me, into the general image or general stereotype society had about women, and also the women had image about themselves.
In 2001, 70 years after the Bhasit sisters were forced to disrobe, an academic and Buddhist scholar, Dr. Chatsuman Kapil Singh, took the Buddhist establishment head-on. She decided to be ordained a bhikkhuni in the Theravada tradition of Thailand. The Thai Sangha was up in arms at this direct challenge to their absolute power and authority. But there was nothing they could do, as she had been ordained by Sri Lankan monks.
Buddham Saranam Gacchami.
For this, she travelled to Sri Lanka to receive her novice ordination and took 311 precepts. 2 years later, in 2003, she became a fully ordained bhikkhuni. Bhikkhuni Dhammananda hopes that one day Thailand will have its own bhikkhuni order.
To join the Sangha, to wear the robe, to be ordained, actually it's a fulfillment of life. Many machis, they were told by their teacher that it is out of greed that you are looking to become bhikkhunis. You can be enlightened even as a lay person. But of course, the monks can also be enlightened as a layman. Why are you choosing this path? This path, as ordained people, is a shortcut. That's what the Buddha said. It's a shortcut. That's why there are monks and there are bhikkhunis. But this lifestyle is not for everyone. It is made only for some. But the door should not be closed for those who have chosen this.
ก็ผมว่ามันก็เป็นเรื่องที่แปลกใหม่ดีเหมือนกันครับ อาจจะมีครับเพราะว่าคือมีการยอมรับขึ้นมาอีกระดับหนึ่งคือจากเมื่อก่อนนี้ยังไม่มีถ้าเกิดมีนี้ปุ๊บก็อาจจะมีการยกระดับขึ้นมาเขาเรื่องหมายถึงว่ายกระดับขึ้นมาอีกสถานะหนึ่งดีขึ้น
อยากจะให้มีภิกขุนีใหม่ค่ะเพราะว่าแบบเราจะได้มีความเท่าเทียมกันมากขึ้นหรืออาจจะเป็นเพราะว่าหนูเป็นผู้หญิงก็ได้แบบเลยคิดแบบนี้อะไรเงี้ย เป็นผู้หญิงก็แบบไม่ต้องมีความรู้เลยเหรอแบบอย่างนี้นะคะแบบต้องแบบมาแบบหาความรู้เอาเองอะไรอย่างเงี้ยแต่ผู้ชายเหมือนกับว่าแบบมีทุกแบบมีพร้อมอะแบบจะไปเรียนเมื่อไหร่ก็ได้นะคะเข้าไปเมื่อไหร่ก็ได้
ถ้ามีภิกษุณีก็เหมือนกับเป็นอีกตัวแทนหนึ่งอะค่ะที่จะทำให้เห็นว่าผู้หญิงก็ทัดเทียมกับผู้ชายผู้หญิงก็มีศีลธรรมมีอะไรเหมือนกันค่ะ
Around the time Bhikkhuni Dhammananda was being ordained, Rochna and her classmates in Lamphun were taking their high school leaving exams. For most of them, this was the end of their journey. The Nuns Institute could not support their education any further. Out of all the girls who took the exam, only Rochna went on to university. She had done well and found funding for the first 2 years of her course. But this meant leaving behind the life of a Mechi forever.
ที่รุ่นเดียวกันนะคะที่อยู่ด้วยกันมานะคะที่บวชไม่ชี้ด้วยกันมานะคะส่วนมากแล้วเขาจะออกไปเขาจะสึกออกไปพ่อแม่ส่งบ้างอย่างเงี้ยค่ะแล้วบางท่านเขาจะออกไปแล้วเขาก็จะไปทำงานด้วยส่วนมากนะคะแม่คิดว่าจะได้บวชเป็นแม่ชีแล้วก็เรียนถึงขั้นป.ตรีนะคะแต่ทีนี้เผอิญมีได้รับโอกาสนะคะก็เลยได้ออกมาก็ดีใจค่ะที่ได้มาเรียนพายัพเนี่ยก็ว่าก็โอเคเขามีโอกาสออกมาแล้วก็ออกมาได้ตัดสินใจนานก็คิดนานอยู่เหมือนกันว่าถ้าเกิดเราออกมาแล้วคือเรากลัวคือจะไปรอดไหมอะไรอย่างเงี้ยไงค่ะก็คือแบบกลัวจะไปไม่รอดอะไรอย่างเงี้ยคือข้างนอกเพราะเราอยู่ข้างในมาเป็นแม่ชีมาตั้ง6 ปีนะคะ6 ปีนี่ก็ออกมาข้างนอกก็กลัวไม่ทันโลกเขาไม่ทันว่าเขาไปถึงไหนแล้วนี่เรากลัวไม่ทันเขาไม่รู้ว่าจะทันเขาหรือเปล่าอะไรอย่างเงี้ยค่ะ
Rochna struggled, studying and working at the same time, as a waitress and at a pharmacy, and only graduated a year after the rest of her class.
มีความรู้สึกว่าคือเห็นคุณค่าของเงินนะคะคือตัดใช้จ่ายหยิบใช้จ่ายแต่ละบาทแต่ละสตางค์นี่คือต้องนึกแล้วว่าเผื่อเราจะทำงานได้ค่ะเผื่อจะทำงานได้คือเราต้องเสียทั้งเวลาอ่านหนังสืออย่างเงี้ยเสียทั้งมันหลายอย่างรวมกันนะคะคือต้องคิดก่อนที่จะจับจ่ายออกไปอะค่ะตอนนั้นถ้าว่าเขายังสำนักยังตั้งอยู่ตรงที่ลำพูนอยู่ที่มีถ้าเกิดเป็นอย่างที่เราเป็นนะคะคือจะให้เข้ามาก่อนนะคะคือมีประโยชน์ค่ะอย่างน้อยทางสำนักนะคะทางแม่ชีทางอะไรนี่เขาต้องสอนให้เราอยู่แล้วว่าเราต้องไม่ฟุ้งเฟือยนะไม่ฟุ้งเฟ้อซื้ออะไรอย่างเงี้ยต้องเขาเรียกว่าอะไรช่วยเหลือตนเองได้อย่างเงี้ยค่ะมีค่ะมีถ้าเกิดเรามีปัญหาอะไรใช่ไหมคะยังไงอย่างน้อยเราคือควบคุมสติของเราได้เรารู้อยู่เสมอไงคะ
A1 ใช่แล้ว
My dream is to create a Buddhist university for the nuns, or college for the nuns. No? There's already one, but still, I think it's still, beginning. We don't really know, but we should have more. I think it's very important for the nuns and for the monks to learn about worldly life, because otherwise they don't really function. They can't really function in this kind of changing world. It's so rapid. Otherwise, they would just stick to the dogma. They don't really know how to interpret and how you call it, give a meaning, make a meaning of the teaching, make it meaningful to the temporary world. I think it's still important to give women equal chance, but we have to learn from the Sangha. You have to really look into what is the education system in the Buddha time. We have to really go back into our legend or whatever history. I think it's good to see what is the failure of the Sangha that we see now. Every time when I bend down, make a vow to the ground, to the feet of women, I felt such a connection, very strong connection of myself in her. And I think that's going to make to the soul, And I think that's a transformation happen at the soul, at the heart level, not the intellectual level.
Or if you want to share something, you may throw your question, or you may share your points with madam.
Sorry, yeah. So before, I thought before we open for question, I'd just like to share my journey in making the film, because I thought that might just put it in context a little bit. Yeah, and then we can open for questions. Yeah. So I actually lived in Thailand for over 11 years. Okay. And in the mid 90s, soon after I moved to Thailand, I mean, I wasn't at all aware of this subject. And in fact, in India, at that time, there was very little information about Thailand. So there was very little I really knew about Thailand. And this was, before the whole internet age when you could just Google everything. So I noticed when I went there that there were many monks wearing saffron robes, all over the streets. But I couldn't see any women. And as a woman, I started thinking like, okay, where are the women practitioners? Where are the women in saffron? Because as I said, I knew very little about what was happening in Buddhism, at least. So, and around the same time as I was there was actually a huge scandal concerning a monk. His name was Prayantra, or is. And this included his breaking of all kinds of rules of the Sangha. So he was taking cruises on cruise ships. He was involved in cash and credit card transactions. He was supposed to use money. He was visiting sex workers, etc. So it was a story which, over the years that I lived in Thailand became more familiar. But it was in those days still very unusual for the mainstream press, including the English press, to talk about such issues in Thailand. And I began thinking, what's happening with the women within Buddhism, and where are they, as they are certainly not visible. At that time, I started understanding more about this whole huge social security network of the Thai temples and the facilities that we saw that they provide for young boys and men, including free board and lodging, free education, and tried to understand why had this bypassed women. Around that time, I was working as a senior research associate in the field of gender and development studies at the Asian Institute in Bangkok, Asian Institute of Technology, and then later as a development journalist. And I heard about Achan Chatsuman Kapil Singh, the lady you saw here who got ordained in Sri Lanka. And I had the opportunity to visit her. So I went to her mother's temple. Her mother was actually ordained in Taiwan in the Mahayana tradition in 1972, and she had set up a temple in Thailand called Wat Song Dharma Kalyani, specifically for women. So when I went to her temple, I actually met all these Sri Lankan women who were very active in Sri Lanka to revive the Bhikshuni Sangha. So this is how I became engaged in these discussions and larger debates around the revival of the Theravadin Bhikkhuni Sangha. But it was only later I moved from Bangkok, where I was living in those days, to Chiang Mai in the north of Thailand in the late 90s. And that's when I found out about the Nuns Institute here in Lamphun, where we saw the women building their own huts and building their own monastery and temple. And that's where I met this young Mechi Rochana, whose story helped me better understand, what exactly is actually happening with women. And with her, I went to her family, her home in the northeast of Thailand, near the Cambodian-Lao border. And then I continued, making the film. And after I had moved back to India, actually in 2004, I still continued going back to Thailand and shooting and finishing the film. So the film was finished actually many years later. Largely, I didn't have much financial support while making the film. It was very difficult to get financial support, so the film carried on a little longer than I wished it to, but it helped me, I think, also deepen my understanding of this whole issue, because as I said, in Thailand, there's very little talking or conversation which is critical, It's not like us, we to like khule aam, no problem, acha isko discuss karo, usko discuss karo, but over there people are much more reticent and reserved, and especially they don't like to speak critically about their own culture. I mean, also specifically to outsiders, but even within themselves. I think there's a whole history of dictatorship in Thailand also, which has suppressed people's freedom and comfort in speaking openly about what's happening in that society, whether in the temples or with the monarchy or, politically or whatever. So there's a whole history of that, which also, I think, kind of makes people a little nervous and scared to speak openly. So anyway, so I just wanted to just say what I was doing there, so you understand, ताकि आपको थोड़ा समझ में आए कि मैं वहाँ कैसे पहुँची और ये फिल्म कैसे बनाया मैंने, और yeah, so please, if there are any questions or anything about the film or my role in it or anything else, if I can answer it, I'm happy to do so. Yes, please, show much.
बहुत ही बढ़िया, congratulations, loved it. लेकिन बहुत सवाल उठते हैं. First of all, when I take that lady, the Thai lady, who goes to Sri Lanka to get ordained, why is it still not in Thailand? ये system नहीं है Thailand में. What happened? Was it there or did it disappear? But I felt somewhere you said कि था, लेकिन it disappeared. But why did it disappear? And how come it's, and the fact that it is still there in Thailand, in Sri Lanka. Now, is there, okay, one person has taken off, but is it motivating others also to take that path or not? Because it is something, you said her mother had gone to Vietnam to be ordained. Taiwan to be ordained. So if her mother could do it, she could do it. Of course, the word gets around. So is it, sort of helping? That is number one.
Can I answer your one first?
Yeah, I've got three of them.
Okay, I'll then. So on this question, so actually there is no record in Thailand of a Bhikkhuni Sangha ever having been there, though there was that was historically, yeah, but as I mentioned in 21 or 31, sorry, these two young women were ordained by their father, who was a radical Buddhist monk. And that was the first evidence in the, which came out of two women actually wearing saffron. And there was this huge drama which took place, and they were put into jail, and then they promulgated a law कि खबरदार, no bhikkhu will ever in Thailand ordain a woman. It is forbidden by law. And that continues till today. Yeah. And in Sri Lanka, as I said, there was a Bhikshuni Sangha till the Chola invasion in 1040. And then the entire Buddhist structure was erased. But when Buddhism was revived, they discarded the Bhikshuni Sangha. So that's how only later in 1996, through an understanding of how the bhikkhus and bhikshus together can ordain these women, and technically, they come into the range of permissible ordination. It's a huge debate in the Buddhist establishment across all sects, Theravada, Mahayana, Vajrayana. So, so that was when they were ordained, So, and that is why Bhikshuni Dhammananda, the academic, could not ordain in Thailand because it's banned. her mother ordained in Taiwan, and nobody really bothered about this because it's Mahayana. It isn't Theravada. So it did not challenge the hierarchy of the established monks, and the Sangha in Thailand. So basically, she then decided to do something which was, again, as I said, वहाँ बोलते नहीं कि हम एक्टिविस्ट हैं या हम मतलब चैलेंज कर रहे हैं, लेकिन वो चुपचाप से करेंगे. And then there'll be drama, So there was huge drama because her ordination happened in 2003, a year before I left Thailand. And I remember every TV channel was like showing this debate, the monks coming up with her there, attacking her because she became a Theravada bhikshuni. So for the first time, they were challenged. You see, ultimately, when you establish these institutions, it's all about power, right? It's about power, it's about control, it's about a lot of money. These are all things which, again, of course, we know what the Buddha said about all of it, but, it just becomes your very central part of your life. So, so the fact that this lady, actually did this was, amazing. And it was just the most radical thing which has probably happened in Thailand in a very long time, as far as women were concerned. But there was one more question which you asked in terms of her. Gosh, I just remembered it and I forgot. But so that's how she then decided to go to Sri Lanka and then, actually take this forward. And yes, so basically, since she's been ordained, which is what I mentioned at the end, because I've just tried to update the film, because the film was finished in 2013. She was ordained in 2003. She became a fully ordained bhikshuni. And since then, now there are over 18, I think now it may be close to 100 fully ordained Thai bhikshunis. Many monks are, matlab, chupchap se उनको ordain कर रहे हैं थाईलैंड में, but most of them are actually going to Sri Lanka. तो वहाँ जाके उनकी वहाँ तो खुले खुल्लम, there's no issue. So over there they are going and getting ordained and then coming back to Thailand as fully ordained women. And now, the royal family still plays and played an important role in all of this. And one of the princesses, one of the daughters of the king, the last king, yeah, I forgot. Actually, this is the younger daughter. Yes, yeah. So, yes, and the favorite of her father, but not the mother and all that jazz. Yeah, but so they actually kind of supported this bhikshuni ordination process. So no one has really bothered them so much since that happened, So they are sometimes invited to the royal ceremonies to preside over some, deaths or ceremonies of different kinds, So there's a little more acceptance. But, it's very interesting because I took this film to Thailand and showed it in universities, Thai universities and stuff like that. And I was amazed by the amount of Thai people who actually didn't know about this, And that was so interesting, because, it's just, they kind of know that there's some issue, kuch garbad hai, औरतों को थोड़ा discriminate करते हैं, but the extent of it or the systematic way in which this has been put in place was not known to, and many of these people were academics, who would have more access to information. So that was also very interesting, and and it was, so anyway, so I just wanted to also add that. Yeah.
My question was that there was one, what about abuses of the nuns, the bhikkhunis, in the monasteries? Because they are doing, so there are different kinds of abuses, and I'm referring to all kinds. And if there's is there a, sort of also a negative fallout of some certain abuses, then what happens? That means, say, sexual abuse or something like that. And if they beget children, what happens? That is what and then support of these nunneries and what about the siblings of such, like Rocha?
Like the girl Rochana?
Rochana's siblings, or the sibling of this boy. What prevented them to take a similar step of moving out and, sort of, was it family pressure, or was it lack of motivation within themselves? What was it?
Okay. So first on the question of abuse broadly, including sexual abuse, it's not the bhikkhunis, it's the mechis, the women in white, who only take 8 precepts. They don't, they basically are in a worse situation than lay women because they're not recognized by the law as practitioners, and neither, so they can't vote, so they're nowhere actually, basically. So it's those women who were or are exploited, and there are still many mechis in Thailand who choose sometimes to remain as mechis. And they are the ones who often stay in the temple compounds and are, especially used for domestic work, ki ye bhi karo, safai karo, vagera. So yeah, I mean, again, as I said, Thailand is not a very it's not a very confrontational. I mean, when things explode, they really explode. Yeah, as we know from the students' movements in Thailand and stuff like the democracy movements, But till that real big dhamaka happens, things are just kind of I don't think, from my understanding, that a lot of these cases actually go very far, and the legal systems in Thailand, they exist, but the law and all these kinds of modern, in a way, Western institutions which we've adopted in our parts of the world, nobody really, I mean, they aren't really respected, or, it's still, kind of rule of the jungle, in the sense activists disappear all the time. I mean, it continues, and now it's even worse actually right now. So, and nobody knows. Once they've gone, that's it. End of the story, and so, I think this, that fear of, kind of going to a court and, ki ye sab karo, jaise hum log karte, it doesn't happen. I mean, frankly, comparatively, we all are still in a slightly better situation in those terms. So, so I don't think those abuses are really followed up on. Like Oepon was saying, ki this nun just said, usne bas bola ki ye monk mujhe abuse kar raha hai, aur bas, I have to just carry this forward another 40 years, jab tak I'll die and then hopefully get reborn as a boy, and then I can become a monk, So this is unfortunately the sad trajectory of their, what's being taught to them. And sorry, and then you wanted to know about Rochana and the siblings and all. Yeah, so I guess Rochana, her family, maybe the girls weren't, the others, her sisters maybe weren't so interested. Her brother, as I mentioned, became a monk. He was actually unemployed, and a lot of boys, so what was interesting in this whole journey is that, there is no kind of, at those days especially, there was no social security network as such, and Thailand, despite this whole image of, tiger economy and stuff, which at least was there for a while, there's a large population, roughly 50%, which lives at or below the poverty line. So people, it's very difficult, for families. And so for this boy, for example, then these temples at least get funding from the state, so in a way the whole system works in this kind of inverted way. तो वहाँ से पैसे मिलते हैं, वहाँ पे आप बैठ के monk बनो, वहाँ पे आप अपनी पूरी एजुकेशन ख़त्म करो PhD लेवल तक, हाँ, और फिर आप monk छोड़ दो और आप बन जाओ एडवर्टाइजिंग CEO या जो भी आप बन जाएंगे रास्ते में, so if you want to use that degree for upward mobility or to earn a living and come back to the secular life, those options are available, so monks, so it's the boys who take those opportunities, and many boys, as I was saying, at that time it was around 600,000 young boys who were studying in all these temple universities at par with government schools and universities. So the world is open to them and they can just enter and leave the monkhood as they choose. But not for the girls, you see. So you know, when you think of Thailand having a huge, you know, sex economy, well, you know, as I said, some 40% of children drop out at the age of 13, you know, so they join the informal sector. Or then where do you go as a woman? You know, what are your options? You know, and that obviously is an economy which has built up, you know, pre-Vietnam War, when the American GIs used to go and there was a lot of a servicing of those kinds of people there at that time. Even before that, you know, this whole tradition of sex work goes back very, very far in human history. So, yeah, so basically, you know, that is really the situation and the kind of options which women have who come from that kind of a background without opportunities which the boys at least are given, and the men, you know, yeah. So that, हाँ जी, नहीं वहाँ पे एक प्रश्न है, हाँ वो तो हो गया. हाँ जी.
राष्ट्रीय माध्यमिक शिक्षा अभियान, you know, I think there are a lot of strides has been taken in this regard.
जी.
So I wonder, you know, whether you have some observations, you know, especially in reference to this education for all goals, which is virtually so like if I look at that, you know, education for all goals and its implementation across the nations.
Right.
So you know, it's like, you know, did you, of course, you know, in that, keeping that in view, like it appears that, you know, that Thailand much has not been done, especially in reference to, you know, eliminating gender injustices. Like here, you know, we have Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan, here we have, you know, Rashtriya Madhyamik Shiksha Abhiyan, where at least, you know, education up to class 12th.
Right.
Like much has been done, you know, considering like, you know, for example, you know, infrastructure deficits,
Right.
like absence in the schools or absence in the higher secondary schools.
Right.
So do you have any observations on that?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't like to comment in detail on the Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan because I'd really like, to look at more information on that before doing that. But obviously, it's difficult to compare the two, you know. Of course, you know, there are other options available. You know, over there, schooling is free and that actually happens on the ground. But, you know, there's so much poverty that even the books and the transport is too much for most families to bear. In India now, I think maybe those problems also exist. You know, a lot of people can't afford books, a lot of whether girls or boys through the education system. You know, India is huge and, you know, I think we're facing lots of difficulties, you know. We still have, you know, a very skewed sex ratio, and which is becoming worse because, you know, as we know, you know, there are many states where fetuses which are female are not preferred, and people actually go and abort them consciously, you know. So you know, we come with a host of other problems, you know, because of our own society and the way we look at women, which has a lot to do with, you know, dowry, which, you know, lots of issues. So you know, I think that's a huge debate, frankly, and you know, I don't think it's so simple to just like answer those kinds of questions in that way. Yeah.
Ma'am, I will not take much time because
Haan
you
ji.
know, we are getting late
Ji.
for the session.
Ji.
So probably, you know, I'll ask in detail, you know, on TV about the thing. But my basic observation is that the way you have made this movie,
Ji.
it's a very sensitive subject. If you see, you know, in the way or in the part of a country, it's a very sensitive subject. But the way you have created the movie and the way you have shown it, it was, I should say, बहुत ही सरल तरीके से आपने एक बहुत important topic को express किया. But my question is regarding the outcome of the movie, कि जो movie का outcome आया बनने के बाद उसने कैसे इम्पैक्ट किया वहाँ के लोगों को, या और लोग जो इसी टाइप के इसी इश्यूज से लिंक्ड हैं या प्रभावित हैं, how are they, you know, affected after seeing the movie? So I think I would like to take this answer now on TV because I think we are getting late. So that is my question
Yeah,
to you.
again, a difficult answer because, I don't have statistics or information about who all. But generally, as I said, I mean, I left Thailand. I keep going back every year. My kids are both studying there actually in Bangkok. But I haven't been able to trace. I've not shown it on Thai, TV, for example, because as I said, I'm an outsider, and these are very controversial issues, and no government likes to be criticized. Especially, they don't like their societies to be criticized, especially by people who come from outside, from another country. So it's not so easy. Just say, Manika, here. Also, we have those issues, frankly, but of different kinds. So, the film basically went in the university circuits, and then people in the university and NGOs, activists, whoever's kind of radical in Thailand is now, the left movement was, had a history which was very different. So now the people who kind of, you might say, are from the left movement are in the NGO sector, on civil society, and they work there. So many people there watched the film, and then they, kind of distributed it. But as I said, the change at least is happening with people like Bhikkhuni Dhammananda, and other women who've ordained or who've become novices, and in a way from within the system, they're changing the system, So that change actually has really taken place. She was the first, and now they are definitely above 80 fully ordained Thai women, and perhaps closer to 100 right now. I don't know the exact figures, So that's nothing to do with me or my film, but that is because of them and their work and their conviction that, women should have equal opportunities. If they want to practice, if they want to be Buddhist practitioners, why should they not have that possibility, So that's what I'd like to say about that, yeah. Hanji. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Now we don't have time to take more questions. It's now tea break. Question is joining us on stage. It is arranged in the lobby of the